Hi, Sarah.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I can't complain. Let me introduce us. I'm Robert Wright, publisher of the Nonzero newsletter. This is the Nonzero podcast, and you are Sarah. And every time we have one of these conversations, I ask you whether you pronounce your last name Posner or Posner, and I never remember the answer. What
It's
is it?
Posner.
It's Posner.
Yeah.
Okay. Glad we got that straightened out. You are, as many people know, a journalist, author. Is your most recent book Unholy?
It is.
How white Christian nationalists powered the Trump presidency and the devastating legacy they left behind. You also write sometimes for MSNBC. What else are you up to these days? How are you spending your time?
So I write a column for MSNBC. I write a column for Moment magazine, which is a Jewish magazine.
Okay.
And I contribute to Talking Points memo. And I'm doing research for hopefully a book that will be completely unrelated to the normal stuff that I write about. So,
whoa, that's got us guessing, but you're keeping a secret?
well, I'll just say that it did not, the events that I hope to be writing about did not take place in this century or the last. So it's really off my usual topic.
You know what's funny is I was perusing your Twitter feed, as I still call it. Although your feed, I must say, has not been refreshed lately, and I want to ask
That's
you
because I'm locked out.
You're blocked out?
Locked out.
Locked out?
Mm-hmm.
Who locked you?
Since October, November of last year, almost a year.
Elon locked you out, or one of his?
I don't know if Elon locked me out. I doubt that I'm important enough for Elon to go to the trouble of locking me out, but I got locked out, and either by design or incompetence, their customer service and tech support has no way, is unresponsive in any kind of constructive way.
Do they tell you that you committed some crime that they're refusing to specify?
No.
That you just can't get an answer? It's like, I'm locked out of my account. What happened? And you can't get an answer?
You get this circular answer, which is fill out this form. And then you fill out the form and it says customer service will be in touch with you. And then you get an email from customer service telling you to fill out the form again. Now, when it first happened, they had a interface that asked you to try again. And it used a reCAPTCHA, so like the reCAPTCHA is usually like find all the staircases or find all the traffic lights. Well, this one was, here is a rat and here are two fingers. And you have to point the two fingers at the rat's ass.
Wait, come on.
I'm not kidding.
Look, I know that Elon has degraded the Twitter, but has he really stooped to that depth? You have to point fingers at a rat's ass to stay on the site?
Well, that was to just get back into my account, and it didn't even work. So, so I haven't, not that, I actually don't really want to be on Twitter. So it's been a blessing in disguise, so to speak. So I guess my account, if anyone were to go look at it, I haven't posted anything since sometime in late 2022.
Do you think maybe you did commit something that was identified as a crime, or some influential person complained that you were being mean or something?
Possibly.
You are mean, right? You're a mean person.
So mean. Everybody knows that about me.
Yeah. Well, that's the first word that comes to my mind, I know. Anyway, back to what you're writing. I was perusing your feed, and at some point, you were listing great books or books you loved, and you mentioned Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall. Now, as it happened, I know nothing about the book, but as it happened, I'm staying in a place where I just noticed on the bookshelf there's a copy of Wolf Hall. So after I saw that on your Twitter feed, I went only moments ago, actually, looked at Wolf Hall, the book, and saw that it takes place in the 15th or 16th century or something. So and I was kind of surprised. I didn't know about this side of you. But apparently you're into. So is the book you're writing fiction or nonfiction? It's nonfiction.
Well, I am trying to figure out whether I can gather enough factual information to write it as nonfiction, or whether I would write it as historical fiction based on a true story.
This is intriguing. I'm tempted to spend all of our time trying to figure out what you're writing about. Can you give me any more clues? Is it
So it involves an itinerant British aristocrat, a disputed will, bitter divorces, deceit, lies, possible murder.
sign me up? Sign me
Yeah,
up. I'll put down a deposit. And this all happened, and the question is whether you can flesh it out enough to make it a nonfiction book.
right.
Okay.
So it's kind of amazing how much information and content has been digitized around the world.
Yeah.
Thank you, Google, and thank you, mostly European archives and libraries, which are astonishingly super hyper organized in the way that they even organize archives. I've recently worked in the National Archives here in DC,
Hmm.
and I was doing kind of like freelance research for a European documentary film company, also on a topic that's unrelated to what I normally do. But they hired me because I'm here, and they needed somebody to do some research in the United States, and I ended up in the National Archives here. And when I say here, I mean Washington, D.C., sorry. And I find their organization, at least on the topic that I was looking into, their organization and classification system somewhat like weirdly inscrutable, and you need an archivist to kind of guide you through it. And it was difficult. Whereas I was doing some research digitally in Swiss archives recently, and the organizational system, uh, the way uh, the tree of like information, here's the
Hmm.
most general information, and then here are the files that fall under that category, was so well organized and easy to search and easy to find what you were looking for. And I don't know anything about archiving or even libraries, like other than using
Hmm.
a library. But I was super hyper impressed with the way it was organized, making it easy to use. Now, I don't mean to disparage the National Archives here. The archivists are incredible in helping you locate the thing that you're looking for. It just seems to me that it's impossible to locate the thing you're looking for without their assistance.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there will be an app for that sooner or later.
Yes.
It's probably an AI startup working on that very problem as we speak. The problem of too many human beings being involved in finding stuff. Well, yeah, no, there's an amazing amount of stuff online. I mean, there's like ancient Buddhist texts being digitized, both in original language and translation and so on. It's the so now you may or may not remember 4 years ago, I had a conversation with you on this platform, which was then still called Blogging Heads. Now it's Nonzero.
Hmm.
Uh, but it was with Mark Schmidt of New America. And
Yep.
I was
I remember it.
despairing. What's that?
I remember having that three-way conversation.
One thing I think happened in the course of it, I don't know if this dominated the conversation, but I professed some concern about the Democrats' chances in the election because it seemed to me that most of the Democrats seeking the nomination might not fare well in the general election and might not be able to beat the incumbent, Donald Trump. One of them did, act, as it happens, Joe Biden. And you and Mark were much more sanguine than I was. But in any event, I think even then, one problem I listed with Biden, which wasn't all that much talked about then, not nearly as much as now, was his age. Because I had noticed that he seemed to be slipping sometimes, in my view. Um, anyway, now suddenly everyone's, and I mean suddenly, like in the last few weeks, right? This has become a much there's been big pieces in the New York Times, the Washington Post, plus David Ignatius of the Washington Post, of course, came out saying he's too old. And that was like a big thing because Ignatius is such an establishment columnist, so plugged into the national security apparatus and so on. And I actually have no idea how you feel about this.
I have a lot of thoughts about this. Mainly that I think it's a huge distraction. It's not Biden dropping out because of his age is not going to happen in any rational world of political strategy or political forecasting. And I think it's a very sad sign of the way the political media kowtows to the political strategists who come and whisper in their ear. And
Who do you think is doing the whispering? I mean, I don't mean individual people necessarily, but do you have a sense for the sector from which this is coming?
I have no doubt that there are Democratic strategists who think that Biden is too old, right? They're worried about youth turnout. I mean, that's something to worry about, obviously, right? The Democratic Party needs young people to turn out because they're overwhelmingly not Republican. And it's especially in these, do we still call them swing states? These states that Trump won in 2016 and Biden won in 2020. So I have no doubt that there are some Democratic strategists who are freaking out about it. But you also have to remember that the entire Republican Party has gone to town on Biden's age for basically since he took office. The disparaging memes and faked pictures and deep fake videos and like all of these things are the Republican Party and the MAGA movement trying to portray Joe Biden as weak and feeble, especially in comparison to their very virile guy, Donald Trump. So the idea that we're having a conversation about Joe Biden, who's having a pretty successful presidency, all things considered, who's only 3 years older than Donald Trump, who's under 4 indictments and tried to stage a coup, and the conversation is about whether Joe Biden should be dropping out of the presidential race, is just like the height of absurdity.
Yeah, but you understand, like from my point of view, I'm one of the people doing the talking. And it's not because I like Trump or I'm under the control of Republican operatives. It's because I'm worried about Trump getting reelected. Same thing. Getting elected. The same thing I was worried about last time. And I think you could name a lot of Democratic candidates who would have no trouble beating Trump. I mean, they're not running.
I don't think at this stage in the race you could name any one of them, right? Because the issue is that we're so far along that switching gears at this point in the race. I mean, I know it's more than a year away. The general election is more than a year away, but that's a very short time in the context of the way we run political campaigns in this country. And I think that having Biden drop out, I think would be a greater sign of weakness of the Democratic Party than him staying in. And I think that Kamala Harris has also been the target of, undermining campaigns to make it seem to Democrats that she would be an inadequate replacement for Biden should anything happen to him in office or even before the election.
Right.
So I just don't see it. Like, I don't think if there was a candidate who could beat Trump, who had a better chance of beating Trump than Biden, why didn't that candidate emerge in 2020?
Good question. And I should say, I'm actually another one that has apparently fallen for the propaganda about Kamala Harris. I worry that she wouldn't beat Trump. In my ideal scenario, I mean, I think the best argument against trying to address my concerns by coming up with another candidate is that there's no scenario where it both happens and doesn't hold some risk of leaving the party divided in a way that would hurt it in the election. Because in my scenario, actually, it's not Biden dropping out. If Biden drops out, you almost have to make Harris the candidate, or he almost has to anoint her. And I'm not personally, I don't think her prospects against Trump are great.
I think Biden's prospects against Trump are better than hers. So
I think they may be. I think they
why
may
him
be.
dropping out would be beneficial.
I'm not. No, that's not my dream scenario. At least I started saying this months and months ago, back when it might have been less damaging. But my dream scenario was for some actual credible candidate, somebody who's in the Senate or even just like a former, somebody who has a real track record, was governor for a while, some credible candidate, like not Robert Kennedy Jr., not Marianne
Cornel
Williamson.
West.
No, somebody that people would take seriously.
Yes.
And would step in, and the polls would immediately show that, whoa, this is a credible candidate. I think, look, you've seen the polls. A large majority of Democrats don't want him to be the candidate, right?
Well, okay. The issue is that name recognition is huge. And I think people like us overestimate the name recognition of other potential candidates to the general voting populace.
Mm-hmm.
It's way too late to put somebody else in the game unless it was somebody who's like just so well known, and all of those people are also too old. I just don't see, I just don't see how that happens. And I think Democrats, okay, let me just preface this by saying I have no doubt whatsoever that Biden will beat Trump in the popular vote. It's the Electoral College that I worry about. Because when was the last time a Republican won the popular vote? But, obviously the popular vote doesn't decide the election. So, that's the thing that we have to be concerned about and worry about. But I also think that we've seen in elections, off-year non-candidate, in some cases non-candidate elections, just like ballot initiatives in Kansas, Ohio, and Wisconsin, that Dobbs is extremely motivating to Democratic voters.
That's the Supreme Court ruling on
overruling Roe versus Wade. And I think the abortion issue is extremely motivating. And that's why you see Trump saying, oh, Ron DeSantis's 6-week abortion ban was a terrible mistake. That's why he's saying it. He's the one who made the 6-week abortion ban possible by nominating all the anti-Roe justices to the Supreme Court, right? Mm-hmm. So it's absurd for him to be saying that now, but he's doing this very Trumpian thing by saying it was a terrible mistake for DeSantis to sign the 6-week abortion ban into law, because he's trying to signal to general election voters that maybe, oh, I'm not so extreme on abortion. Well, Democrats should no way let him get away with that sleight of hand, because if it hadn't been for his Supreme Court nominees, states wouldn't be able to pass 6-week abortion bans into law. So I think you also have to take into account all of these countervailing things that are different from 2020. The fact that Roe has already been overturned, whereas in 2020 it was it hadn't happened yet, but Trump had already put his Supreme Court justices in place. Trump is under indictment, contrary to sort of the popular wisdom that has taken hold. His subsequent indictments after the Alvin Bragg indictment have loosened voters' favorability ratings of him. So there are a lot of things in play. And I think the making of Joe Biden's age as like the number one thing is a distraction from all of those other things.
Yeah. Let me, before we move, talk about other aspects of the race, including the Republican side and Ron DeSantis and so on. Let me ask you one more question about the Democratic side. I mean, first of all, I think nothing is better for your name recognition than suddenly becoming the front runner in one of the major two parties for president, especially when, you would be the person who's going to oppose Donald Trump. I mean, I think name recognition can take care of itself pretty fast. In fact, we've had a number of candidates that weren't all that widely known at a popular level. Jimmy Carter, probably Bill Clinton, although he was known by political insiders, Clinton. But, we've had people come out of relative obscurity. But in any event, here's a question. My kind of a person I sometimes mention as an example of what I mean about somebody I think could easily beat Trump, even though not super high name recognition, not much charisma, but smart enough and accomplished enough so that on a debate stage, I just think he'd completely outclass Trump. and that is Chris Murphy of Connecticut. I'm just curious as to your view of like, how do you think Chris Murphy would have a better chance than Joe Biden of beating Trump?
No.
You don't. Why
No.
is that?
Because he wouldn't, by putting his name in the ring, that wouldn't automatically make him the front runner. It would only make him the front runner.
No, but I mean, assuming he were the Democratic nominee, assume that.
How would he get to be a Democratic nominee?
Okay, but it's a thought experiment. I mean, the question is, do you think that, and I concede it's probably too late for stuff like this to happen. But I mean, I guess we have very different views of Biden. I think Biden's very vulnerable, and it's not going to get better. He's aging. And
so is Trump.
Well, no, I'm saying let's try to make it not
like
be
an old
Trump,
man too.
but a different kind of old man, an energetic, a different kind of look. Yeah, his age is a vulnerability too, and I'm saying let's don't give that away by having a candidate for whom it's even more of a vulnerability. You know, let's exploit that. That's what I mean. That's when I say, look, it's not that hard to find a Democrat who completely outclasses Trump on the debate stage. That's one thing I'm talking about. Have it be somebody under 70. What a radical idea.
Is Trump even going to agree to do a debate?
Well, I think he will refuse at his peril personally, but we'll see. Anyway, I think he'll agree to debate Joe Biden.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that hypothetically, Chris Murphy is an attractive candidate from the standpoint that, he's served a long time in the Senate, which can be a vulnerability in and of itself. He's very strong on the gun issue, which would be very delightful to see on the national stage and the presidential stage. I just don't think, like you're right, he doesn't really have charisma, whatever. But I think the bottom line is, that's all hypothetical, because the bottom line is if Biden were to say today or tomorrow that he was, dropping out and retiring, what does that do to the rest of his term? I mean, does he get anything else done?
Oh, this is a problem with all second-term presidents. The nation has survived.
But he's not a second-term president.
I know, but I mean, the phenomenon is not a radically new one for the country to confront.
Yeah,
it happened with Obama. It happened with George W. Bush. It happened with Reagan. It happened with Clinton. Yeah. Well, anyway,
I guess it would take away, Matt Gaetz's zeal to impeach him, but that's just a ridiculous sideshow anyway. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, we hope. I mean, but that's the other thing is I think, basically there are wild cards. There are strengths Biden has going in terms of what he's accomplished and how things are going and so on. And then there are wild cards, and it seems to me most of the wild cards will either turn up neutral or bad for him. And I think one example is the Ukraine war. I don't think there's going to be some magical great ending, and things could be worse. And another is Hunter Biden, I think. I mean, I think regardless of what actually happened there, I think it's possible that people like Matt Gaetz could succeed in getting a kind of publicity, just raising enough questions that, I mean, Hunter is 100% downside for Joe. It's like, there's just nothing, it's just an unfortunate situation for him. There are things that people aren't aware of by and large that are a little shady. We don't know what happened, but I just worry about and then his age is a wild card. Maybe Trump's too, to some, in the sense that we don't know how much worse it could get in a year. In terms of just how vibrant he looks, how coherently he speaks, and so on. But I'll leave it at that and give you the last word on that subject before we move on.
Yeah, I just think that the downsides of him dropping out or passing the torch outweigh him staying. I mean, I think we have a problem in our politics of people staying in politics too long.
Yeah.
Chuck Grassley, Dianne Feinstein, Mitch McConnell. I mean, the list goes on. I mean, what's the average age in the Senate? It's like in their late 60s or early 70s. It's ridiculous. And it's especially ridiculous. You can see why the Republicans want to do it because their base is old, but the base of the Democratic Party is young. Now, this is not an argument for Joe Biden to drop out right now. Like, I think that that's like a unique situation that has to be sort of like assessed on the merits, and we've discussed that. But I think by and large, the age of Democrats, particularly in the Senate, is, or of Democrats and Republicans, is ridiculous. But it's especially ridiculous for a party whose base is young and whose possibilities of growth rely on that young base.
Yeah. Yeah. So you think that behind the dump Biden movement is basically strategists like Carville? I mean, Carville has gone on the record, right? More or less.
You know what?
It's
I don't
that
understand.
if that's yeah. What?
I don't understand why does anybody listen to James Carville? Why?
Well, he did help get Clinton elected and reelected,
Okay,
right?
yeah,
It was a
but
while ago, but
that was ancient history. I mean, isn't it time for Democrats to listen to somebody? I mean, like, he's complaining that Biden is too old. Well, maybe he's too old to listen to. I mean, it's just like, he's from another era. I mean, dude, I mean, I am pretty sure, okay, I am pretty sure that if I polled, 20 somethings that I know, that they would have no idea who he even is.
yeah.
Right? You and I know who he is because we were sentient adults in the Clinton era, but a lot of Democratic voters do not know him. I mean, probably, people who watch MSNBC know him because, he goes on the air and pontificates about stuff. But, I think part of the problem in our politics is, let's set aside the,
Yes.
authoritarianism of the Republican Party. Let's look at problems within the Democratic Party structure. And one of them is just this inability to move past sort of your typical, inside Washington political strategists. And, okay, you can say Carville's not inside Washington, that he's from Louisiana and all this other stuff, whatever. But, it's just kind of this fossilized view of how to do things. And I just don't see why it keeps going that way.
Yeah. So on the Republican side, I assume you think Trump is pretty much a done deal, or you think someone could gain unexpected momentum?
Yeah. Yeah, it's very unclear who that person might be, right?
Yeah.
Because DeSantis has just crashed and burned. I mean, I think that is just few people disagree with that, right? I mean, I think the political press loves to have a story that, like, oh, here's DeSantis's new strategy, because like it gives them something else to, like, a new twist to report on. But he just doesn't seem to be making traction. And I think um, Trump just has a hold on a large enough segment of the Republican primary base that that none of the others can challenge him. And I think also, like, they have the same problem they had in 2016, which is that there are too many people running against him.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also no clear person of that group of people who could beat him. Now, I remember in 2016, they tried to make Ted Cruz that kind of last minute person who could maybe, if everybody else dropped out, maybe Ted Cruz could beat him. But, that didn't work. And I don't think it'll work this time either if they decide they want to anoint, DeSantis or Nikki Haley or whoever they think might do the trick.
Do you think DeSantis ever had a chance? I mean, if he had pursued a different strategy, or Trump is just there's just too many Republicans who like Trump a whole lot.
Yep.
That's the problem.
That's the problem. Because DeSantis tried to out-Trump Trump. He did his whole anti-woke thing, and he signed the 6-week abortion ban, and he just, he talked about spiritual warfare and really tried to, like, press all the buttons of the evangelical base. And while I think if you asked a lot of these voters if they thought that DeSantis has been a good governor of Florida, they would say absolutely. But when put up against Trump, like, nobody can compare.
Mm-hmm. So Nikki Haley has no prayer either.
Honestly, I just don't think a woman has a prayer in the Republican primary.
Hmm.
And and I can't think of any of the others who would, Vivek Ramaswamy became the flavor of the moment after the debate, but like then he sort of faded because he's not a serious candidate.
Mm.
I mean, not that Trump is a serious candidate, but you know what I'm saying. He's
Yeah.
yeah, I hope people who listen only could see my little air quotes. I just think that when it comes to the Republican base, Trump has a hold for three reasons. One is that there are voters out there who don't think that hard about it, but consider Trump to have been a successful president, and before that, a successful TV personality and successful businessman. And that's like sort of like an unshakable view of him being strong and successful and wealthy and all of that. Then there's his white evangelical base who just believes that he was, anointed by God to save America at this very critical moment. And he nominated these justices to the Supreme Court and did these other things. And, he's our guy. And that's not going to change regardless of what he says about abortion, because he's already proved to us that he's in our camp on abortion. And if he wants to hoodwink moderate or independent voters for the general election, what do we care? We know he's in our camp.
Uh-huh.
And then there's the kind of the Republican voter who showed up for the insurrection. Maybe they didn't smash open the windows of the Capitol and go inside, but they showed up, and they would show up for Trump in the sense that they think he was wronged. They think he's wronged by the liberal media or by woke liberals or whatever. And they just sort of vaguely fall into that camp of, we think liberals are bad and we want to own the libs and cancel, conservatives are being canceled and all of that. And so like when you put all of that together, I think his hold on the base is hard to shake.
So how do you think about the swing, the potential swing voter? I mean, what is the big question mark over, say, a Trump versus a Biden election in terms of outcome? Is it whether a certain identifiable group of voters bothers to vote or stays at home? Or is it who are you thinking of as in play? And in what sense are they in play? Is the question whether they'll vote at all, or is the question whether they'll vote for Trump or Biden? Are there many people that could still go either way on that, or what?
I think there are many people who would go either way on whether they're going to vote for Trump or Biden. I mean, I think those people are out there, but I mean, has there ever been so much information publicly available about a candidate as there is about Donald Trump?
Yeah, you don't often see two people who have served 4 years as president running against each other.
That's right.
Not in our
That's
lifetime.
right. I mean, I think that for Democrats, the key is going to be like it was in 2020, for Biden to win states like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin and Arizona and Georgia, right? I mean, that's what's going to turn the electoral college. And I think in those states, it's voter turnout is key. To spend a lot of time trying to convince voters who haven't yet made up their minds by October, November of 2024, it's probably not the best use of the time as compared to mobilizing voters who are going to be energized by particular issues. I mean, sure, there are voters who are going to be energized by being opposed to Trump, but Democrat or independent voters who are energized by being opposed to Trump. But like, it's not going to take a lot of work to get those voters to the polls, right? Like, if they're energized by being opposed to Trump, then like your work is pretty straightforward. I think the key probably, if there's one key, and there probably, there usually isn't, but if there's one key, I think that's an easy one to identify for Democrats, it's the abortion issue, and to keep it in play, to keep it like this is the world the Republicans want: bans on abortion, criminalizing abortion, throwing doctors in jail, putting, reading, having the government read your Facebook messages to see, like that you were planning to go get an abortion, banning abortion pills, like all of that, I think that it's been shown to very much energize voters in Kansas, Ohio, a very red state. energized voters to vote no on that ballot referendum over the summer. So I think that is a top issue for Democrats to focus on, and I think Trump knows that, which is exactly why he criticized DeSantis on the abortion ban.
Okay. And what was Nikki Haley's attempt? I think you wrote something about this, but I haven't read it. And I didn't watch the last Republican debate. How did she try to get around? What did she say about contraception or something?
Yes. So now there's a move, particularly by female Republican candidates, to talk about contraception, because they know that, in Justice Thomas's concurrence in Dobbs,
Oh,
he
right.
talked about, well, like maybe Griswold versus Connecticut, which is the
Which
Supreme Court
overruled a state level ban on contraception.
for married couples in the 1960s. Maybe that's on the chopping block too because of Dobbs. And so, these Republican women realize that this is just like a complete, if abortion is a complete loser for them, how would banning contraception work, right? So they're really going for it with trying to change the conversation to be about contraception. And that's what Nikki Haley tried to do at the debate. Said we should really be talking, says, I don't want to talk about abortion. Let's talk about contraception. It's like, yeah, you don't want to talk about abortion because your party has this extreme position and is imposing these draconian penalties on women and doctors for obtaining an abortion. And it's like completely on the, fringe extreme side of abortion. And that's where the party is right now. And so you're just trying to change the subject. If they really cared, if the thing about it is that if they really cared about abortions and abortions are wrong and we should have fewer abortions, they would have been pushing for contraception, handing out contraception on street corners, right? I mean, what's the best way of stopping a pregnancy before an abortion is needed?
Yeah. So I guess Trump, that's not a line he's probably likely to try to use in the general, like, but I'm pro contraception. Yeah, that you are. And so you think this will inevitably hurt him. I mean, so long as DeSantis is in the race, he can contrast himself, as you said, with DeSantis, citing DeSantis's whatever, the 6-week thing in Florida, and sound relatively liberal on abortion. But come the general election, that doesn't help. He can't keep talking about DeSantis.
That's right. I mean, although maybe he could, maybe he thinks it's a good strategy in the general because he could say, I'm not a Republican like Ron DeSantis. I'm against these 6-week bans. But what difference does it make? The president doesn't have any control over whether state legislatures pass 6-week abortion bans. So it's a meaningless, from a policy or legal perspective, it's a meaningless promise.
Yeah.
As are most of Trump's promises anyway.
Now, do you think the war on woke is not at all a political winner for him? It doesn't seem to have done a lot for DeSantis, but that could just be because Republicans trust Trump to prosecute the war on woke to the full extent of his capabilities. What's your take on that?
There's some polling out there that shows the war on woke has kind of run its course with voters overall. But I do think it's very energizing to some members of the Republican base, particularly those who spend a lot of time online and just get embroiled in all of these meme wars or get outraged at some news item about whatever, right? Like a teacher who used the correct pronouns for a kid, and then like it becomes a whole thing, part of their discourse. So, and I think that for a lot of right-wing conservative movement organizations, the war on woke is a fundraising tool, but I don't think it's necessarily that motivating. I don't think it's motivating at all for general election voters. And you see, I mean, I think that DeSantis has gotten nowhere with Republican voters on it. I mean, there are other reasons for that. including Trump's durability that we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
And also that DeSantis is just a terrible, I mean, he's just a terrible candidate. Like by any like standard of like, how does this candidate interact with people? I mean, he's just like painfully terrible.
Yeah, in some respects. I mean, on paper, he looked, kind of good to me. Anyway, it ain't working out. Do you, on the woke thing, are there particular issues that you think Trump could trot out in a debate to contrast himself with Biden that would put Biden in an uncomfortable position? The one that comes to my mind is sports. Like, I think most parents who have daughters who would like to compete in high school sports, if you say to them, should a male be allowed to compete with your daughter for the number one spot on the tennis team? And if he, and so on, most of them, Democrats and Republicans, are just going to say no, of course. And I guess, and I don't know what Biden said about that, but I assume isn't he kind of hemmed in on that issue, or are there issues where he can kind of break ranks with some elements of the progressive coalition on wokeness? And do you even agree with me that maybe that's the most vulnerable one? There are other issues that you can, that maybe Trump could make some hay out of. But what do you think about that?
I am, I've looked at the polling data on this, and I'm in the minority, obviously, of Americans who thinks that trans women should be allowed to compete in schools and university sports on women's teams. I just don't have an issue with it, and I think it's the only fair and right thing to do. But I have also looked at the polling data on that, and I see the direction that has gone in, which is that people oppose it because they think it's not fair. Now, I think it's an issue that has been extremely motivating to Republican voters just because it's been presented to them for so long, like well before this entered kind of the national conversation. And so it became one of their hot button issues, along with, marriage equality and abortion many, many years ago.
You mean the sports issue in particular, or okay,
the sports issue in particular,
okay,
along with, bathroom access.
That is another one that seems to me Trump could get some mileage out of. But go ahead.
It's been a loser even in red states. So the sports has been the thing that has been more motivating for Republicans. However, I think on the national stage, when, the country is facing, kind of existential issues like climate change and gun violence and, the erosion of democracy, that just seems so. I mean, I know that for the people involved, it's a huge issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like, if you're going to go to the polls on election day and say, okay, this one guy, he tried to stage a coup. He's under indictment for 4 things, including trying to stage a coup, cover it up, intimidate witnesses, stealing classified documents, trying to cover that up too, intimidating witnesses, tampering with witnesses. And the other guy thinks that it's a fairness issue for trans women to play on women's and girls' sports teams. I mean, how is that even remotely?
Well, actually, I've known a lot of parents, and I've been a parent, and I can well imagine. I think one question is, how many parents are there who have daughters who are seriously into sports, and it's like a big deal to them? But to my mind, like, the day is never going to come when you can realistically expect parents who have who have daughters who are doing sports in junior high or high school or whatever to say, "Oh, sure, it's fine if some guy with 7 times the musculature of my daughter comes in and unseats her on the tennis team, and all the time we've spent, making her better tennis players for not. That
But
day's never going to
there are a
come.
lot of instances where the trans girl or trans woman has joined the team and no one has a problem with it. And also the number of times this has actually happened, that a trans
Yeah.
girl or woman wants to join a team, is really, really small.
Yeah, I think that's the other hope, is that for Biden, is that parents, kind of put it in perspective. I don't think the issue actually meaningfully comes up a whole lot.
It
But
doesn't.
but but
And
but
also, in a lot of instances, when it does, the other players are perfectly fine with it.
it that can happen. I mean, especially in a team sport where, and most sports is team sports, where if it's like one addition of the team, it's not like someone is being shoved off stage. Tennis is actually unusual in the sense that there's like one person who can be the top, the high school's #1 player, and they'll compete in that form, in that role against everyone and so on. And that's the clearest case. But am I right in thinking that Biden, that the politics of the situation do force Biden to defend the position that yes, your daughter has to deal with this.
I believe that it is the position of the Civil Rights Division at the Department of
Right,
Education.
right, right. Okay. Um, what other what other things do you worry about? Let's imagine a Biden-Trump thing. What do you think are the scariest wild cards, or Biden's biggest vulnerabilities, or Trump's biggest strengths? With the kinds of voters you're concerned about, and
Well, there's obviously the disinformation problem, which we haven't talked about today. Um, and so I think that is obviously always going to be a big concern. Right up until election day, disinformation about voting, how to vote, whether your vote is secure, disinformation about Biden, disinformation about Kamala Harris, disinformation about Hunter Biden. Um, I think that it's just something that we have to, um, it's going to be omnipresent for the foreseeable future. I mean, obviously it was present always in politics, but now, um, there are tools to make it easier to create and to transmit widely.
yeah, I mean, one question is how good will the AI bots be?
In a
I
year.
think pretty good. I think pretty good. I mean, I think they are going to be deployed big time. And Elon Musk
Mhm.
saying uh, his latest controversy, and I should say we're taping this some days before it'll appear. 4 or 5 days before it'll appear. But so I'm trying not to talk about super topical stuff. But Musk wants to start charging all Twitter users apparently to be Twitter users. And his case, and this part I take seriously. I don't know whether you have to charge people to do this, but I think this is a worthy goal. To be sure that everybody on there is an actual human being, and if they are deploying bots, you can at least find out who the human behind the bot is. I think that would be nice. But in any event, I think this could it could get weird. It could get weird on both sides as people and not necessarily like big political players deploy the bots, just like creative hackers. Could get weird.
Yeah, I mean, it got weird in 2016 and 2020.
Hmm.
So, I don't I think that it could develop in ways that we can't foresee or anticipate right now. But I kind of feel like that could be the biggest wild card, because I do think that, just to circle back to what we talked about at the beginning, at the top, I think that disinformation about Biden's age has already been deployed. Like,
Hmm.
you've seen on social media these, deep fakes of him, you know, uh, doctored pictures, deep fake videos, sort of fake stuff about him looking really feeble and weak. And, um, Yeah, I mean, I could see that being something where,
Yeah, I mean I was actually thinking about conversational bots, but
so that too, but yeah, sure.
but you're right. I mean, the deep fakes is maybe the biggest issue. I don't know. So listen, we've been talking close to an hour. And what we typically do on the Nonzero podcast is do, this much as a public podcast, and then move into overtime, which is available to paid subscribers of the Nonzero newsletter, which I encourage everyone to become. You can click on the link in the show notes to get to a place where you could subscribe, or you can Google Nonzero and Substack, and you will have the deep satisfaction of knowing that you're supporting worthwhile conversations, if you consider them worthwhile. And if you don't, my question is, what are you doing still listening at this point? You should re-examine your priorities. You shouldn't hate watch. You should never hate watch for more than 10 minutes. It's bad. So before we go, Sarah, anything else you want to say about your own stuff, other books you want to mention? No point, I guess, in trotting out your Twitter handle.
Well, I am on Blue Sky, which is the
Oh,
new.
aren't we special? Oh, can I have an invite? I mean, what am I, chopped liver?
You can have an invite.
You
I'll
can.
send
You
you
have
an
the
invite.
power to invite me.
I do. I have 5 invite codes.
My ship has come in. That's good. Okay, so what's your handle on Blue Sky? Have you
Same as
memorized it
on
yet?
Twitter. Yeah.
Which is what?
At Sarah Posner, just my
Okay.
name.
Okay.
And yeah, it's interesting. It's very interesting just to see. I was a later adopter of Twitter than I am, relatively speaking, of Blue Sky. It's sort of interesting to see how a new social media platform takes shape. And a lot of people say it feels a little bit like Twitter in the early days before all the Nazis came to Twitter, and I guess it does feel a little bit like that. I mean, for me, I think the jury is still out. Like, I'm still trying to figure out like what I want. What do I want out of social media? And do any of these social media platforms satisfy that? But I think for now, given that I'm locked out of Twitter, and I didn't have any interest in using Threads, uh, Blue Sky seems to be the best option. I did try Mastodon and I did try Post, and I didn't like either of those, and so I just kind of abandoned my accounts there. So I'm happy to give you or any of your listeners, paid or unpaid, an invite code.
That's good paywall bait. On the other side of the paywall, we have 4 Blue Sky invites. Anyway, I'm not saying that we do, though. I don't want to get sued. Anyway, so thanks everybody who's listened this far. I hope you'll stick with us for the rest of the conversation. And in any event, we are now headed into overtime, where we're going to talk about. I want to talk more about the social media thing, including how bad you think Elon Musk is. Okay, so overtime begins now.